As your custom, please join us with Reverend Flores of the Ashbury United Methodist Church. Please stand and remain standing for the pledge. Is the Reverend here tonight?
Oh, my goodness.
I think we have a missing Reverend. Why don't we have a moment of silence? If you would keep in mind the people we have in the service that are in harm's way tonight. Thank you. Thank you very much. Would you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Council members. Especially council members. Ms. Vach, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Winger?
Present.
Mr. Kramer?
Here.
Mrs. Turner?
Here.
Mrs. Carroll?
Here.
Mayor Fletcher?
He's back. Preliminary matters. Are there any agenda additions, deletions?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. For several reasons, I'd like to combine Mr. Kramer's item, which is 9B1, along with the C1. And the reason I'd like to do that is A, it's the same subject, but I do believe a great mass of the people are here one way or another to discuss that particular issue. So I think it would make more sense to do it all at one time, but I would have to have Mr. Kramer's permission.
Mr. Kramer?
Well, I think it would probably be much appreciated to some people to have it done sooner than later if they're paying attorney's fees.
Is the council okay with this? I have any objections?
Which item did you want to include that with?
9B1 to move up to C, along with C1, 2C1,
With 2C1.
under public comments, in other words.
It would be under Mr.
Probably Mr. Hunter's discussion.
Yeah, Mr. Hunter would go first, but then what I'm proposing is that we're in the public comment. We do all the public comment on that particular issue one time, and then we deal with Mr. Kramer's. And,
Yeah, that sounds realistic to me.
I mean, it's just realistic. I don't know.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. We'll move, yes.
We have one other item. The cemetery, we would like to defer to a later council meeting. There are some questions that have come up about that, if we can defer that action.
You want to withdraw that action then
Yes.
from your minutes?
Right,
Okay.
we'll place it on a future agenda.
At the next meeting.
That'll be fine.
Motion approval as amended.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those of you here for the cemetery issue, we're going to bring it up at our next meeting, which will be when, Tammy? The 17th?
17th.
And just for
17th.
informational purposes, on the Crestlawn Cemetery, it really dealt with the fees that we were going to be asking for increases on.
Okay, thank you. Proclamations. Where is that Touchberry guy?
He's here.
Come on up here. You no good scurvy dog. You're going to desert us?
God, Captain.
He's not going too far.
Be chief.
We're going to keep him within range.
We know where to cause trouble now.
We might
Last
need
guy
him
to call me
sometime.
a
We're not going
scurvy
to let
dog,
him.
I arrested, Mayor.
Proclamation, whereas Keith Touchberry began his career as a uniformed patrol officer on May 15th, 1989. Wow, you have been here a long time, Keith. After spending 6 years in the United States Marine Corps, and thank you for your service. He has served the city of Vero Beach with distinction and epitomizes the core values of the police department. Whereas Captain Touchberry made his mark earning his first lieutenant's medal in early December 1989 by successfully performing CPR on a resident of the Indian River Bay Drive in January 1991. Officer Touchberry was elected as K-9 officer. He and his K-9 partner Rocky received numerous letters of commendations from the public, fellow Vero Beach officers, and other law enforcement agencies for assisting in the location of narcotics and the apprehension of criminals. Whereas Captain Touchberry was promoted to corporal in 1995, and in early March 1997 distinguished himself as he and his other officers responded to a residential fire, and he entered the fully engulfed apartment to rescue the unconscious man. For the actions, the officer received both the life-saving and the meritorious service medals. In January 2001, Captain Touchberry was again promoted to the rank of lieutenant, where he served in the patrol and staff services. Then in 2005, Lieutenant Touchberry was promoted to captain. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the City Council of the City of Vero Beach, Florida, thanks Captain Touchberry for all his years that he has served the City of Vero Beach, and we wish him health, success, and prosperity for many years to come. We genuinely appreciate your service to the community, Captain. God bless you.
Thank you, Mayor.
If you have a go. It's your mic.
Oh, I didn't think it would be this hard.
It's been a while.
It has been. It's been a long time. It seems like just yesterday that I graduated from the police academy, and with Danny Cook back there, now lieutenant, and Corporal Darrell Rivers, and retired Master Police Officer David Shapiro. We all members of Law Enforcement Class 50 and came up, together. I just want the public to know, and everybody here tonight and those watching at home, I've thoroughly enjoyed my service here. It's been tremendous. And it's been tremendous because of two things. The first is our culture. We are a culture that values integrity and service. We value hiring the most qualified people and mentoring them along the way and turning them into community leaders. And the other thing I'm so thankful for is the people. I'm going to miss them the most. They are the highest caliber. They truly are. And I'll make a prediction, all right? If this city council and future councils continue and increase their support of this organization, its culture, and its people, then I will not be the last person you see leave to be a police chief in another city. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Come right down here.
So glad you got one.
Thanks for your service.
Take care of him over there, will you?
Do we have a representative from the Daughters of American Republic here? Come right down here, please. Good evening.
Good evening.
And the Children of the American Revolution, do we have a representative for them? Okay, we'll mail this one to them. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
Proclamation, whereas September 17, 2013 marks the 296th anniversary of the drafting of the Constitution of the United States of America by the Constitutional Convention, and whereas it is fitting and proper to recognize this document in its memorable anniversary and to the patriotic celebrations which will commensurate the occasion. Whereas Public Law 915 guarantees the issue of a proclamation each year by the President of the United States of America, designating the week of September 17th as Constitution Week. Now, therefore, I, Craig Fletcher, Mayor of the City of Vero Beach, Florida, do hereby proclaim September 17th through 23rd, 2013 as Constitution Week, and ask our citizens to reaffirm their ideas of the framers of the Constitutions had in 1787 by vigilantly protecting the freedoms guaranteed to us through this guardian of our liberties, remembering that lost rights may never be regained. You have a few minutes to tell us what you want.
Daughters of the American Revolution?
Yes.
It's a national organization of women who have been able to trace their ancestry back and claim a patriot who served in the American Revolution, either in service bearing arms or in service to the Army and the militia by providing services, food, horses, whatever. And it's something that, of course, we are committed to and we hold very near and dear to our hearts, that we know these ancestors by name. It's a very important thing to us, but primarily it's important to keep the knowledge and the recognition of our great Constitution in the forefront of all Americans, and especially in times like this. Thank you.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you. That would be great. Thank you. Thank you so much. There's a life-saving award to be presented to Officer Cian Toll. Are you here this evening? Come on down here. Chief, are you going to do the honors?
Yes, sir.
Good evening once again. Sean Tool's been with us just over 11 years, about 11 and a half years, and Sean epitomizes what Captain Touchberry was just referring to. And this is actually his sixth, I'll say it again, sixth life-saving medal. I'm going to read a short portion of his report, and I think that's the best way to start this off. On Thursday, July 25th, 2013, at about 1:56 a.m., I was dispatched to 2207 Buena Vista Boulevard regarding an unconscious male who was not breathing. I responded and observed an adult male, Paul Wickert, lying on the bedroom floor on his back. He was not breathing and had no pulse, and his face was blue. I performed 2 cycles of CPR and deployed my AED. The AED shocked Wickert, who was still unresponsive. I continued through 4 cycles of CPR, and the AED again assessed the patient, with the result being no shock advised. I continued CPR, and Wickert gasped for air. I then felt a strong pulse in his left wrist. EMS then arrived on scene and continued to treat Wickert. Indian River County Fire Department and EMS personnel from Medical Station Number 2 transported Wickert to the Indian River Medical Center at about 5:30 a.m. that day. We called, and we were informed that Mr. Wickert was in stable condition. This was Sean's report from that morning. And as you can imagine, we responded within 2 minutes of that call coming in from his wife. Now, what's real remarkable about this whole thing is that 2 years ago, July 2011, this was July 2013, 2 years ago, July 2011, Sean saved Mr. Wickert.
Oh, my gosh.
This is the second time Officer Tool has given CPR to Mr. Wickert and saved his life at the same address. So it's quite remarkable, a story that we're going to share with the community, but we wanted to share it with everyone here and that's viewing this evening, and of course, you, the City Council.
Hey, you know where you need to be next year about this time, don't you? You need to camp outside his door.
Every 2 years in July, we're going to have a patrol Mr. Wickert's home. But so I thought that was a proper way to put this. I'm going to let Officer Toole say a few words, and I'm certainly going to let Mr. Wickert say a few words.
Absolutely.
We have the medal here for Sean again. It's 6, so it's an interesting medal with like a clover leaf on it. But again, congratulations, Sean.
I'm not going to say a whole lot. This is really not necessary. This is icing on the cake. I'm just happy to be in the right spot at the right time. I love doing my job, and I'm glad everyone else, including paramedics and emergency people at the hospital, doctors and nurses, did theirs, and it all worked out.
Yeah, but they wouldn't count if you didn't do yours first,
Got
Sean.
2 minutes there.
You were the primary care.
I just want to say he's my guardian angel. Hello. Thank you.
like to say is, my son and I, okay, we are very thankful with him. We will always going to be thankful. And I know it's only one person, one God. He has the power to take and give the life.
Yep.
He's an angel. Helped me to keep him on here. It's the second time. The first time, I really panicked. My husband was totally dead. He was cold. He was flu. He was no pulse, nothing. I told my husband he was dead. When they come, I see how they brought him back. It's the first time I see, okay, the cops, the police, any officers, service, looking different way. Before I used to be the police, I used to be thinking of traffic, gonna get a ticket. I just what I did wrong, but now, for me, it's a kind of doctor. They have a doctor because they are the first one in there. Doctors did the job there later. But my son and I, we're going to be thankful for him. We owe him to have my husband who does. And I hope one day we can retrieve him, all what he does for us. I know my little one is very thankful with him. And he is recognizing him whenever he's here. And like I say, we owe him something. And I hope one day we will be able to do something for him, something like that. And the police department, like I said, now we have different view. I have myself, I look different in the police department. Now it's not the way I used to be looked before. And I'm really, really thankful, and God bless you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, our six-time winner of the Life-Saving Award.
I think that may be the record. I'm not sure, but
Thanks a lot.
So, what a great job. Thank you.
Great job.
We have our transactional attorney, Mr. Igo, with us tonight to make a presentation. John, good evening. Good to see you again.
Nice to see you, everyone. Good evening, Mayor Fletcher and honorable council members, Tammy, Jim, and Wayne. I've been asked to deliver a brief status report and to ask for your approval for payment of our legal fees. I'll be happy to answer any questions. And I note that Pat Bryan and Virginia Cook are here from FPL, and they're available if you have any questions for FPL as well. On August 20, 2013, FPL's CEO, Eric Silligy, sent a letter to Nicholas Gariello, the general manager and CEO of FMPA, outlining a proposal for changing the structure of the transaction. The primary change in the proposal is to terminate FPL's existing agreement with OUC for the purchase by FPL of power on the Stanton 1 and Stanton 2 projects during the initial period following the closing, up to 3 years, but no later than December 31, 2017. OUC would continue to assume responsibility for the city's entitlement contract obligations under Stanton 1, Stanton 2, and St. Lucie for the entire period. But under this proposal, FMPA would take on the assumption of those obligations during that period. There would be a payment made to FMPA in consideration for their retention of these obligations. FMPA would be able to sell the power to its other members instead of directing it to OUC. FPL, this payment would come from the city to FMPA, and FPL would cover the cost of the payment to be made by the city. And this is in lieu of, well, as I said, the existing agreement would be between FPL and OUC would be terminated. This structure would eliminate the need for any further discussion about IRS private letter rulings because there would be no private purchase of power. This has been a huge, complex issue that we've been dealing with numerous parties and their law firms, and all of the tax lawyers have put their pens down, and their billing pens as well. And it really addresses one of the principal concerns of FMPA with respect to the risks they perceive of the transaction, because there won't be any impact on the tax-exempt status of the bonds. FPL also offered FMPA an option agreement for participation in the nuclear power plant at Turkey Point, details to be worked out. And also, FPL offered to resell to FMPA after December 31, 2015, a portion of its firm transmission capacity on Southern Company's transmission system. FMPA reacted positively to the proposal. As I said, there's a lot to be worked out. Also, in Mr. Siligi's letter, he made it clear that this offer to FMPA is conditioned upon and part of the structure that we proposed, that I outlined the last time I was here, with respect to the approval process and the nature of the transition of the agreements and the obligations from the city to OUC, so that we would be dealing with approval by the FMPA Board of Directors and executive committees, the ARP Executive Committee, as opposed to 100% of all participants. So as I said, there is more work to be done. The price for the significant payment is to be negotiated. One way to look at this is the payment is to account for the difference, as it says in the letter, the difference in the scheduled contract payments under the Stanton 1 and Stanton 2 contracts and the market value of those contracts. FPL was going to absorb that cost itself by purchasing the power, and we're now suggesting that a payment to FMPA, where FMPA would assume the obligations, will hopefully solve the problem. FPL has asked FMPA for a response by September 20th, and representatives of FPL and FMPA have had discussions on this topic since the meeting held on August 23rd. We had a meeting on August 23rd at FMPA, and representatives of FMPA, FPL, the city, and OUC were in attendance. So the primary subject was this letter, which was delivered on August 20th. It was a very positive meeting. I'm very encouraged by the discussions that we had. It was a very open, frank, cordial discussion. And I'm feeling very optimistic because I believe we have a path. If we can reach agreement between the parties on this payment to be made, I hope and believe the rest of the details will fall into place. And we can achieve a consensus on the deal structure and the approval process. Assuming this happens by September 20th, the conceptual consensus on the structure and this payment, we'll be in a position to move quickly on drafting a set of definitive documents. We already have kind of an outline. I've been working on an outline of what would need to do to the existing agreements and what new agreements we'll need. And we'll be working closely with counsel at FPL, OUC, and FMPA on that outline and on the definitive documents. I do want to point out that the city is going to need to retain a financial advisor. One of your advisors has a conflict because of his representation of FMPA, and we've talked to Jim about this. We've had conversations with a financial advisor, PFM. They're nationally known. We talked to them about the concept of the contract insurance as additional credit enhancements for the city's contingent obligations, backstopping OUC. We got some positive feedback. They talked to a couple of insurance companies. We don't know what it's going to cost yet, but this is kind of out of my bailiwick. I really think the city needs an experienced financial advisor to deal with the insurance companies they deal with every day. Not asking for your approval on that now. We want to get a little further down the road, but I will get back to Jim about that. So let me just segue to the second part about legal fees, and then again I'll answer any questions about the report or the legal fees. Since we were engaged in August of 2011, the transaction has taken a lot of twists and turns, and I readily acknowledge that the costs are far more than any of us anticipated when we started this project in August of 2011. I think the primary driver of the cost has been the complexity of and the restrictions in your existing agreements and the number of parties involved with competing interests. But we're doing our best. I think we've found a path, and I hope we can get there shortly. But I just want to note that in recognition of this burden on the city, I obtained approval from my firm to volunteer some discounts on the last few bills, and we charged off about $50,000. And Jim didn't ask me for that. I just did it voluntarily in recognition of the burden that's been imposed. It may seem like a drop in the bucket, but for us it's not. So today we're asking for the City Council to authorize for payment in advance of invoices as we go for an additional $250,000.
Any comments from the council? Questions?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I would like to say, although I know for the public looking at the costs of our attorneys and what we've spent, it seems like an awful lot of money. I would like to remind them that in 1 month, say, when we bring FPL rates to this community, in 1 month we will save $2 million in 1 month. This is the most important thing we can do for economic development. For those small businesses, that electric cost saving goes straight to their bottom line.
Any other comments or questions by the council? Hearing none, I'll make a motion to authorize the extra payment to the company.
Second.
Under discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Opposed.
Passes 4-1. Thank you for joining us, John.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor, if I may also comment on this, and I do appreciate FP&L being present. We are trying to attack this project together. We think we do have, as John pointed out, a path that we can follow and move forward. We've hit three major issues. One is the transmission. The other is diversification of the fuel base for FMPA and all of their cities. And the other is to address the IRS. But at the same time, it's selling back their own power. And we feel like that to us, it's a workable solution. And from all indications, and Nick Garriello, the executive director, sat through the entire meeting, engaged in the conversation. We were able to respond not only for his engagement in conversation with OUC, but also FP&L and ourselves. So.
Yeah, this sounds like a great tech.
I would just like to thank you for all the work that you've been putting on, and we do appreciate the reduction in the fees. Thank you for that from myself, and I hope from the rest of the council members. I do also want to acknowledge the fact that the president of your corporation has gotten involved in this to try to assist us as we go forward, and it shows a definite direction of the company that they do want to do what's right for the city of Vero Beach and our small little city here with our 15,000 people and our 50 or 60,000 customers are really a drop in the bucket for FP&L when we consider them on a statewide basis, and even more so for NextEra Energy, which is a big national corporation. And yet having the president of your company come down to try to help us out through this, we really appreciate that.
You mean FPL's?
Yes. Yeah.
That's right. Not your company. Their company.
Yeah. I'm on your side.
Thank you.
Okay.
We're happy about that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. We have a presentation for the Lagoon tonight.
Dr. Witter.
Dr. Witter Orca, good evening. You have some opening statements and a presentation?
I do.
Why don't you tell us a little about your background first?
Okay, I'd be glad to. And I have to figure out how I'm going to advance the slides here. So I am Dr. Edie Witter. I'm actually a deep sea biologist. I came to this community in 1989 to work at Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institution. I needed their submersibles for the kind of research I did, which is on bioluminescence. And in 2005, I left Harbor Branch to start ORCA, the Ocean Research and Conservation Association. And the reason I did was a number of reasons, but the big one was the Pew Oceans Commission report and the U.S. Commission on Ocean Policy report that came out the year before that, detailing the deterioration of the oceans. In 2004, I discovered a brand new species of deep sea squid over 6 feet long.
Wow.
And in the same year, this report was saying that the oceans are dying. And I felt like we were destroying it before I could even find out what was in it. And I wanted to do something about that. So I've spent a lot of my career working with engineers to develop technologies to address problems. And so I wanted to see if I could do that to respond to the U.S. Commission on Ocean Policy call for action in terms of the need for one thing in particular was advanced monitoring. And that doesn't work.
Does she have
How can she?
some way she can... Ms. Vach will help you here in just a moment.
Yeah, I can turn that on. There.
I don't think that's on yet. Now I know it's not on.
And the cavalry's arrived.
Testing? Okay.
There you go.
Okay. Anyway, so ORCA is dedicated to developing advanced technologies that can address some of these environmental challenges. And the challenges that we're facing in the Indian River Lagoon right now are what are being faced nationwide, only we just seem to be getting it in spades at the moment. But an awful lot of the problems nationwide have to do with this thing called nonpoint source pollution. Back in the 60s, when we had rivers that were actually catching on fire because the pollution was so bad, the Environmental Protection Agency was formed, and their focus was on stopping the point source pollution that was entering our waterways, factories that had pipes that spewed filth directly into our waterways. And they did a pretty good job of shutting those down. But since then, we've seen a continuing deterioration of our waterways. And a lot of that has to do with this problem of non-point source pollution, which is rainwater and snowmelt that runs off the land carrying a whole variety of different pollutants. And there's, from animal feedlots, you can get nutrients, antibiotics, pathogens, off of cropland, nutrients, pesticides, sediment. I mean, it's every place has different problems. We can get runoff from our streets, we can get septic tank leakage, we can have groundwater contamination, even air pollution is entering our waterways. And the thing is, on the Indian River Lagoon, we're talking about a 156-mile-long estuary. And we've got different problems in different parts of this estuary. And so we have to address it that way. We have to understand that there's no one problem and no one solution. We have to figure out what the problems are in the individual areas and try to find the solutions. So we've had a two-step process to fighting this battle. The first is we look for pollution sinks, because when you're talking about water pollution, water is really just kind of like a railroad car carrying the pollution from one place to another. The pollution often ends up in the sediment. And so if you look at pollution sediment samples for pollution, they're actually a pretty good indicator of where pollution has accumulated. And the problem is, what do you test for? Because there's literally maybe now thousands of potential pollutants in our environment, and the costs are astronomical. And so we figured what you needed was the equivalent of a canary in the coal mine. And for the younger people in the audience, in the old days, before we had monitors for the poisonous gases that the coal miners had to worry about, they would actually take a canary down with them in a cage. And if the canary stopped singing, or worse, keeled over, they knew there was poisonous gas and they needed to get out of there. They didn't necessarily know which gas it was. So the canary is what's known as a broad-spectrum bioassay. It's broad-spectrum in that it's sensitive to a whole range of different things, and a bioassay. It sounds like a pretty fancy terminology for a canary, but you get the idea. So I figured we needed a canary, and the one I chose was my favorite thing, which is bioluminescence. And this is actually a bioluminescent bacterium that's been isolated from even deep-sea squid. But the cool thing about bioluminescent bacteria is their light output, their ability to glow, is linked to their respiration, their ability to breathe. So any pollutant that interferes with their ability to respire interferes with their light output. So it's a really quick, inexpensive test for toxicity. Doesn't tell you what the toxin is, but it just tells you where the toxins have accumulated. And so thanks to funding from a local Indian River County organization called Impact 100, we actually were able to do a pollution map of the Indian River Lagoon in Indian River County, working with Indian River Charter high school students. And they went out with us several times a month to collect these sediment samples and process them in the lab, and then create these pollution maps and also learn how to communicate them. And so this is the pollution map that the students created from the 17th Street Bridge up to the Wabasso Bridge, and it's showing relative toxicity. We also measured total nitrogen and total phosphorus. The toxicity levels were much, much higher than we expected to see. In fact, some of the highest we've seen anywhere. And this is in the same area that we've lost all this seagrass. 47,000 acres of seagrass have been lost in the Indian River Lagoon after the past few years. That's the equivalent of losing a rainforest. A seagrass meadow is one of the 3 most biologically diverse habitats on the planet. You've got rainforests, you've got coral reefs, and you've got seagrass meadows. And that's why the Indian River Lagoon used to be called the most biologically diverse estuary in the United States, because we had all these different types of seagrass that provided habitat and hiding places for all of the little fish and little shrimp and little creatures that need hiding places. And it's gone. It's just completely gone. And even the rhizomes, the root structure in many of these areas are gone. So it's not going to come back easily. So we're still trying to figure out what the toxicity is due to. And actually, I brought this map to the City Council here a couple of years ago and showed them this example of what a pollution map can tell you. This is a total nitrogen map between the 17th Street Bridge and the Barber Bridge, so just downtown Vero Beach, showing a high buildup of nitrogen in the finger canals. And we were seeing, every time we went and sampled up there, all of these grass mats floating. So people were blowing, or the crews were blowing their grass clippings into the water off their lawns or into the gutters inland, and those feed directly into the water. And the grass clippings have picked up all the nitrogen, and so that they sink to the bottom, and you just get this buildup of organic nitrogen that then keeps feeding these algae blooms. And the interesting thing, though, about this map is the 2 canals in the top left-hand corner that are blue. And they are associated with a golf course, the Vero Beach Country Club. And turns out the Vero Beach Country Club has been using best practices. They use a low-dose organic liquid fertilizer. They bag all their clippings. They don't poison their water hazards. They use water plants. A lot of best management practices, and they work. And having seen this map, this council instituted a fertilizer ordinance well in advance of the county commission, and I commend them for that. We also have a device that we call Kilroy, we call him Kilroy because we want him to be everywhere, like that little Uber GI of World War II fame. And Kilroy is a water quality monitoring device that can monitor in real time. It's wireless, it's low cost, easy to install. We have everything attached to that one yellow pole that we call Kilroy's hat rack. So there's the power source, which is the solar panel, the communications, which is basically cell phone technology, and then the sensor array below water. And because it's all attached to that one yellow pole, we can do an installation in 20 minutes. And it's very easy to pull it out for periodic cleaning as well. And we can attach a whole range of sensors to this, our own as well as those that we purchase from other sources, nutrient sensors, dissolved oxygen probes, hydrocarbon probes, you name it. So our approach right now to what's going on in the Indian River Lagoon is we have started the campaign for a clean Indian River Lagoon, and we're trying to raise $3 million over 3 years in order to create a map of the entire Indian River Lagoon. I'm sorry, $6 million over 3 years. It's $2 million a year. To map the entire Indian River Lagoon for pollution and put 50 Kilroys out there in order to be able to figure out where the pollution's coming from. And we actually just put in a proposal to Senator Joe Negron for 25 Kilroys to instrument the Indian River Lagoon. And our goal is to make you, our citizenry, participants in trying to solve this problem. So if you go to our website, you'll find that we now have a page that talks about why we monitor our waters and gives a description of environmental variables and, how monitoring these variables is exactly what a doctor does. When you go into a hospital and you're sick, the first thing they do is slap monitors all over you. People think, what does monitoring do for you? Well, you know what it does for you. If you go into a hospital, you want them to figure out what's wrong with you, and then you want them to make sure that whatever they're doing for you is making you better and not worse. That's what the monitoring is about. And so we go into detail about the different environmental variables that keep the lagoon healthy and how we're monitoring them. And then if you go and click on our little picture of Kilroy here, you can go to our map, and that map shows where we have Kilroys right now in the Indian River Lagoon from the St. Lucie Inlet up into Vero Beach. And we now have 13 Kilroys out in the water column, and all of that data is available to anybody here. You just go to our website, click on the picture of Kilroy, and that map comes up. And if you click on any one of those arrows, you can just see the readout for the last 3 days for the different variables. And actually, we're producing a video right now to try to educate people about what it is they're seeing and what they want to be looking for. Or you can do an interactive plot and pick the data that you want to plot over whatever time period you want. This is the Indian River County project that has just recently been installed. We have 3 Kilroys in the 3 relief canals in Indian River County, and they have nutrient sensors on them, nitrogen sensors. So the North Canal, the main relief canal, and the South Canal are the 3 circles that you see there. And you can pick any one of those and look at what's been happening. And we've just done these installations, but this is a typical nitrogen plot for what's coming out of the South Relief Canal. And you can see how spiky it is. And this is an indication of just how difficult these measurements are, because in the past, the way this has been handled is people go out and they take a hand sample. They'll take a water sample and they'll come back and tell you how much nitrogen is in your water based on that sample. Well, when did they take it? I mean, you could take it and show there was almost no nitrogen, or you could take it and show that there was a whole lot of nitrogen. That square pulse in the center there is particularly interesting because that looks like somebody opened a floodgate and let something run for about 2.5 hours and then shut it again at exactly around midnight, just on either side of midnight, which is kind of interesting. One of the advantages of Kilroys is because they are small, we can move them around, and so we have the capability of, well, first of all, installing them in canals, which is hard to do for a lot of bigger sensors, but then we can leapfrog them up those canals to be able to try to figure out where these different problems are coming from. There's another problem that's recently been brought to my attention. The Coastal Conservation Alliance has recently taken on the death of the seagrass as part of their project. And These are pictures that were provided by Captain Brendan Burke, who's in the audience, of Roundup use in the city and county properties, where they're edging the properties with Roundup, and right next to the waterways, even right next to the all canals lead to the lagoon signs. And the thing is, there's a lot of controversy about how bad or not bad Roundup is for aquatic environments. There was a lawsuit in France some years ago where they claimed that it was false advertising to say that Roundup was not toxic to the environment, and specifically to the aquatic environment. And the courts in France upheld that lawsuit in 2007. Monsanto took it all the way to their Supreme Court, and it's still been upheld. Now, there are real concerns about how Roundup is being used, because even if you talk to Monsanto, they're going to tell you that, well, you're not supposed to use it right next to a waterway, or if you do, you're supposed to use their special formula called Aquamaster, and only, in certain dosages. And what Captain Brennan was seeing was bucket loads of the stuff being used to wipe out Brazilian peppers. They're just pouring it by the gallon on, and so that's clearly got to stop, because we've really got to be concerned with what kind of impact that's been having on our seagrasses. The good news is that most ecosystems can heal themselves, but we first need to know for certain what is causing the damage. And I just wanted to show you, because people are so frustrated, and we talk to them about monitoring, and they just get frustrated because what good is monitoring going to do? Well, monitoring is going to do a lot of good, because there really are innovative solutions out there. You just have to know which ones you need to be applying in different places. But this is an example of one that was applied in the Philippines. That's an incredibly polluted waterway on the left, and what it's turned into today with something called active island reactors, which is a technology that's been developed in Scotland, and I'm very interested in, because actually I think we're going to be partnering with a group that's using them down in Brazil to test them, to see how effective they actually are. But they've been used in water treatment facilities and found to reduce ammonia, coliform bacteria, and the chemical oxygen demand and biochemical oxygen demand, which are all indicators of pollution. So there are things that we can be doing that will work. We just have to figure out what the problems are so that we can address them. And with that, I'll close and be glad to take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Witter. Are there any questions for Dr. Witter from the audience or the council? Thank you very much. Excellent presentation.
Thank you for continuing to work with us.
Mr. Drittenbass, how are you, sir? Haven't seen you for a while. You've been hiding.
I should have said this is one of the solutions.
We've been tying oyster mats. You should have Saturday. I know where he's been.
Paul Drittenbass, 4885 13th Place, Vero Beach. Tonight I come to you wearing a hat as a fishing guide and a member of the Rotary Club of Vero Beach Sunrise Board of Directors to tell you a little bit about some good news, that something, you hear so much doom and gloom, well represented and justified, that the lagoon is in trouble. But there are areas of our lagoon that are still thriving. They're challenged, but they're still alive, and we're trying our best to keep them alive. A very small project and a small part of preservation and enhancement is called RISA. RISA, the acronym, stands for Rotary Initiative for Submerged Seagrass Awareness. A little history about this, an overview. About 3.5 years ago, as a fishing guide, I'm pulling some of my clients across the Moorings Flats, which is a very famous area south of Vero Beach, about 350 to 400 acres of sovereign-owned land, state-owned land, that has, at one time or another, had all 7 of the seagrasses documented at this location. It's one of the few places in the lagoon that actually supported all 7 of the seagrasses, and there are only 7. And I saw a lot of prop scarring. And prop scarring is and the end result of somebody that really doesn't know where they're running their boat and grounds their prop from deeper water where they're operating their outboard motor to shallow water, and the prop scarring across the side of the flat usually goes in about 60 or 70 feet, and then it stops. And the reason for that is when you run aground, that's about as far as you'll go. And then, of course, at the very end of that, you see the large delta where they're putting their motor in reverse, trying to back off of the flat rather than getting out and pulling the bow around. So prop scarring, if it heals, it takes up to 20 years for a prop scar to heal, if it heals at all. If it settles in with sediments and silts, the grasses will not grow in it. The rhizomes won't traverse or longitudinally or laterally and accrete into the sediments. So you'd have to remove that silt, put in some sands, and then the grasses will support. So a lot of those prop scars have been out there for years and years. Some of them are starting to heal. And I thought to myself, how can we stop this, or how can we prevent it? So I started calling around to the FWC, Sean Davis in Tallahassee, seeing if we could do what was called a pollen troll zone, a regulatory zone like they have up in the Mosquito Lagoon. And unfortunately, we can't because the DEP does not have a regulatory vehicle for pollen trolls outside of national preserves, which Mosquito Lagoon is. So they suggested a non-regulatory zone or an informational zone by putting 24 buoys around the 350 acres of grasses, making an awareness for people who are boating that there's something here, slow down, back off the throttle, don't prop scar. It's ironic because this is east of the Intercoastal Waterway, and you can see in that map in the upper right-hand corner, that's the moorings South Passage Canal. The limits of this is basically the northern limit is the moorings channel that comes in from the Intercoastal Waterway into the moorings development, as well as the south limits are the Round Island channel that goes into Round Island Park, and then totally east of the Intercoastal Waterway. There are already 2 regulatory permits there. Regulatory means if you break or violate these regulations or restrictions, you can be ticketed. Unfortunately, we don't have enough officers to enforce the regulation. There's one that says anything east of the Intercoastal is 30 miles an hour, anything east of the Intercoastal Waterway is idle zone, and there's another regulatory overlay, and it's a manatee zone, so it's idle speed. So if you see someone speeding across that flat, they're breaking 2 ordinances already, two Florida permits, Florida regulations. Ours is informational only. In other words, if you want to run across this with your big motor while you're idling and you tilt it up, or you put up your jack plate and you pull your prop up, you can idle across it, you can idle all the way around it, but do not put your bow up and go in a plane across this flat. And that's the preservation portion of this. Why the moorings flats? This area still gets flushed by the Fort Pierce Inlet twice a day up to the 17th Street Bridge and sometimes a little bit farther north depending on the wind and the amount of tide. It's still clean. The grasses are thriving there. It happens to be, according to Dr. Grant Gilmore, one of the most prevalent sea trout spawning areas in the entire Indian River Lagoon, and he's studied them from Jupiter all the way up to New Smyrna. He's done extensive testing and hydrophone testing and recording of this area and a lot of reports. And to get this permit in place, we created what's called a public-private partnership between Rotary Sunrise and the Indian River County Commission. About this time, October last year, I appealed to the Commission asking them for funding to match some of the funding that the Rotary Club of Vero Beach Sunrise and our sister club, our partner club, the Rotary Club of Vero Beach, who was most gracious coming forward and say, we need a cause. We've had a nautical flea market. We're looking for something to do to help the lagoon. So we partnered up $14,400, and the Indian River County Commission gave us $9,300 to fund the total project, which is around $19,000 complete. Then we had to go through the permitting process. 3.5 years later, we have all our permits. 35 different entities we had to present this to over 3.5 years. The permitting process was the easy part. The one caveat on the FWC permit was everyone that has anything to do with this area had to buy in. We had to present it to everybody, mosquito control, County Commission, Property Owners Association. What you have in front of you is the last letter of appeal to the South Beach Property Owners Association back in July. Up at 30th of November last year, 30th of November. And George Lamborn, they approved it unanimously. Our permits were submitted. We now have our FWC permit from Tallahassee. We have our DEP permit from Palm Beach with Sophie Dimitrova. We also have the Army Corps of Engineers no objection permit, and also the U.S. Coast Guard no objection permit. The next step, on the 12th of September, which is next Thursday, I'm going before the Rotary Club of Vero Beach Sunrise Board of Directors to request release of funds that's in our 501c3 account to purchase the buoys. Our marine contractor, Dave Foster, out of Tequesta, will be installing these buoys the last week in November and the last week in October and the first week in November. In addition to that, we have right in the middle of this moorings flats an oyster bar. And some of you may have been to the Lagoon rally last Saturday or a week ago, 2 weeks ago Saturday. Time flies. And we've been in cooperation with the Coastal Conservation Association, as Dr. Witter alluded to. CCA has taken a new approach about managing fisheries to managing habitat. It's almost a 180, which is very important, very critical right now. If you don't have habitat, you don't have fish, you have nothing to regulate. So now we've taken a new approach. I'm on the board for CCA for Treasure Coast. We're going to enhance that oyster bar that's out in the middle of that flat. I've met with Dr. Grant Gilmore and Dr. Vincent Encomio from the Florida Oceanographic Society, who's an expert on oysters. We're going to be placing 400 mats. It's a 16 by 16 polypropylene mat where 36 oysters are zip tied to the mat. They're placed on the bottom of the lagoon in an area that's determined through our resource permit with DEP, staying 2 meters off of any existing seagrasses. They are tied together, weighted down with concrete landscape donuts, and they're placed in the water in March, so that when the spat or larvae release from all the oysters that are in the area around the seawalls and on the existing bar, they will adhere to the shells and start a new colony. Within 3 years, it'll be a homogeneous mat of new oysters. Why oysters? Each shell, a mature oyster, will filter about 50 gallons of water a day. They're filter feeders. They clarify the water column. They allow light to penetrate deeper into the water. Photosynthesis to occur on the seagrasses. More seagrasses creates more habitat, more fish. Symbiotic relationship. It's a full circle of life. The oysters are easy to do. They're free. It just takes volunteer people to tie them. And I want to thank a lot of people. Some council members were there on Saturday.
It's a pleasure.
That tied some of the mats. We had a new record. We tied 155 mats in one morning, which is a new record. We're planning on tying another 1,000 of these mats over the next year and placing them again in March of 2015 on another site that's being reviewed right now with Dr. Vincent Comio. So it's a very small piece of doing something positive for preservation and enhancement, but it has to start somewhere, and it's a great place to do it, and it's something that everybody can do. Everyone always says, what can we do to help? Well, step over here and tie a mat. And they did, and they did a great job on Saturday. So for that, I'm grateful. So I wanted to just tell you there's a little hope at the end of the tunnel. From the 17th Street Bridge south all the way to Jupiter, there are some healthy seagrasses. They're being compromised right now. Like Dr. Edie Witter said, we don't know why our seagrasses died from the Barber Bridge up to Sebastian, Grant, and Mico. We had no algae bloom like they had in Mosquito Lagoon and Banana River, but our grasses died. They disappeared. And that's the puzzling part right now. But at least they're healthy to the south, and we're going to preserve this piece of the lagoon, which is so precious to so many. And thank you so much for your time for listening
Thank
to
you, Paul. Any questions of Mr. Drittenbass?
I just wanted to thank you for bringing the solution for these oyster mats. I mean, this is a relatively inexpensive thing to do, and yet it's a proven to make a difference.
Yes.
You know, proven to really help our lagoon. So I would encourage everyone the next time they have an oyster tie mat, you know, go out, tie a few mats, do your part for the lagoon. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you,
And
Mr. Mayor.
Paul, I'd just like to mention that there are actually 5 members of those 2 Rotary clubs here in the audience tonight, and I thank all the members of the Rotary clubs that showed up tonight to give you your support. But the reason that these 2 Rotary clubs have the funds to be able to work with these projects is because this city council has allowed the Rotary clubs to have fundraisers in our community parks.
Yes.
The Nautical Flea Market, which takes place in Riverside Park, and the Craft Brew and Wing Fest, which takes place in February. Do you like that little plug I got in there?
Yes, thank you for that.
That
We
takes
noticed
place
that.
along Royal Palm Point. And by having events in the community and fundraising, the Rotary clubs can then use the funds to help with projects like this to give back to our community again.
Yes.
So just
Thank
wanted
you.
to make that comment.
Thank you for your perseverance.
You're welcome.
Got more
Great
patience than Job. Would the council like to take a break now before we go into public comments?
I think it'd be great.
Okay, we'll be back here at 7:30. We are adjourned.